have been listening to my live stream here regularly, solar, as far as electricity production, costs less than any other form of electricity right now. So a lot of guys just aren't aware of how cheap solar panels have gotten and how much the cost of electricity is when you use solar to produce power. But as far as solar is concerned right now, the cost for 30-year PPAs, power purchasing agreements here, for any of the utility companies in California right now, you're looking at about $20 per megawatt hour, which roughly comes out to 2 cents per kilowatt hour. Basically, the utility companies right now for solar developers, they pay 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And as I just mentioned a moment ago, the average cost for residential per kilowatt hour electricity in California right now is 32 cents. So they go around paying 2 cents per kilowatt hour to the solar developers, and they turn around and sell that same electricity to us for 32 cents per kilowatt hour. So I don't know about you guys, but that's the classic definition of corporate greed. As you can see this chart right behind me, in the past 10, 11 years, they've been raising their rates by, on average, somewhere between 6 to 9% annually. And all the while, the cost of production has gone down the past 10 years because, as I mentioned, solar power has become the cheapest form of power generation anywhere around the world. I mean, in fact, if you look at some of the other projects that are out there right now, there are the cheapest worldwide right now is some projects in Saudi Arabia right now, where the cost of production per kilowatt hour. If you see here, there's a PV plant in Saudi Arabia, supported by the Saudi government. It's going to sell its electricity for just 1.04 cents per kilowatt hour in the future. So I mean, basically, that gives you an idea. The cost of power production when it comes to solar panels right now is by far the cheapest of any form of electricity right now. I'm not saying that as someone, I don't have any agenda against the oil fossil fuel industry. I don't have anything particularly for the renewable energy industry either. All I want to do is present the facts as is. A lot of people just don't understand how cheap solar power has gotten over the years. As I mentioned, there are projects in the Middle East right now where it's literally 1 cent for the production of 1 kilowatt hour. And here in the US right now, as I mentioned, just the 2021 average for the providers here in California, part of CalISO, was around $20 per megawatt hour, or 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So again, the cheapest form of fossil fuels when it comes to producing electricity right now, when it comes to baseload natural gas power plants, the cost of electricity production is right now 5 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on where in the world you are. Nuclear is, I mean, if it's a legacy nuclear power plant, it's going to be a little lower than that. But if it's a brand new nuclear power plant, unfortunately, as much as I love nuclear power plants and I love fusion electric, unfortunately here in America, we can't get our shit together. When it comes down to construction of nuclear power plants, when it comes to all the red tape that's associated with putting up nuclear efficient power plants, unfortunately, our cost is just completely spiraled out of control. If you guys have seen how there's some articles about SMRs, small modular reactors, which are basically small size nuclear power reactors. If you look at the average nuclear reactor out there, it's on the order of somewhere between 600 megawatts to 1400 megawatts. The Canadian design typically can do reactors around 600 megawatts. The most common size that we have in the US right now are between 1000 to 1200 megawatts. But as far as our cost to build a nuclear reactor in America right now, the most recent power plant was the Vogtle power plant over in Georgia. If you guys are curious as to what that ended up costing in terms of cost per watt. So this is that nuclear power plant. This is the most recent one that was built here in North America, if you look, or built in the United States. If you look at the commission dates, Unit 3 was commissioned July 31st of last year. And if you look at the cost for Unit 3 and Unit 4, that's $34 billion. $34 billion. The last two reactors were 1,100 megawatts each. So if you divide 34 billion dollars by 2,200 megawatts. Let's just do the math right now. For those of you guys who are curious, if we're looking at 34 billion dollars divided by 2,200 megawatts, you're looking at a cost of $15, a little over $15 per watt of generation capacity. That's in this day and age right now, when, as I mentioned just a moment ago, solar right now, all costs inclusive for utility grade solar right now, costs less than $1 per watt. Having said that, obviously solar is not available around the clock. It is intermittent. Obviously during the nighttime it doesn't produce power. So right now in America, the best solar power plants out there right now have a capacity factor of about 28 to 30%. So basically, if a solar power plant was designed to put out 100 gigawatt hours, or not, let's say 1 gigawatt hour a day, 28 to 32% of that is how much it would actually put out throughout the course of a day, because of the fact that, again, it only produces power when the sun's up. Nuclear power plants are great because they are a base load power plant. They produce power around the clock, 24/7. So obviously there is some value to that. But the question is it worth 15 times the amount of the cost of solar power plants? When it comes to solar right now, some of the, as I mentioned, is only about 28% to 30% most for the highest capacity factors right now. So you would, at the very least, need 4 times the amount of capacity out there. Only 17%, Dunk. What was that in reference to? Are you talking about nationally or globally? If you're talking about globally, that might be a more representative number. Here, at least in as far as the Southwest United States, most solar power plants here have at least 25% when it comes to the capacity factor. So again, depends on where in the world you are. I'm not saying that this is the number to take for calculations that's representative for around the world. All I'm doing right now is trying to give it's incredibly difficult to compare solar with nuclear because, again, when it comes to capacity factor and how they work and the amount of water they need, the amount of land they need, there's a lot of different factors involved with that. My point right now is just the fact that nuclear, unfortunately, in America, we're just not able to produce it at a low enough price, at a low enough cost point, whereas other countries around the world are definitely leading the way when it comes to adopting nuclear power plants. Only reliable in South and North 40%. No, Doug, I'm not here to suggest that solar power is going to work for everyone out there. When it comes to residential solar, for most part in the United States, I mean, it is still cheaper than the utility grade power. So because of the fact that utility, as far as the cost of the per kilowatt hour from utility companies for residential customers is just very, very high. If you were just seeing just a moment ago, we pulled up the numbers for the EIA numbers for the cost of electricity in the United States right now. California is averaging 32 cents per kilowatt hour, and the Northeast is in the 25 to 30 cents per kilowatt hour range, which, as I mentioned just a moment ago, the PPA agreements that the Cal ISO companies such as SoCal Edison, PG&E, and SDG&E are paying right now is $20 per megawatt hour, or 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So again, as far as residential solar is concerned, if you guys have been watching my content and talking about off-grid living, I mean, usually I'm at my office. I'm at my ranch, rather. I'm down at my office right now. I'm going to go back to my ranch tonight. Does your wife work? Yes, Andrew, she does. Let me see here. China is the best in nuclear plants. Andrew, in fact, the Koreans are. When it comes to the cost per watt in terms of capex costs, I've gone through that a couple of times. If you guys are curious as to why that is the case, so we always bring up the map here, and I don't say that just because I'm Korean, but as far as construction costs, especially in the developed world, guys, we do always bring up, it's easy to bring up China, and obviously China, as far as a country is concerned, it is still not. It's not considered a developed country. There is still huge income disparity within China itself, and overall, it is a middle income country, whereas Korea right now, as of 2024, the GDP per capita of South Korea, is actually higher than Japan. So, having said that, the reason why I say the Koreans are so damn good at doing nuclear is, if you look here, this is one of their nuclear power plants here. They have a couple of nuclear power plants here. So you see 2 of them right there. You have 2 additional reactors right there. And right next to that, you see a couple more. and they're building a couple more right next to that. The reason why Koreans are able to build nuclear reactors so damn cheap is because they serialize the production of them. If they have an area where they're going to be developing nuclear power plants, they build them all in the same area. So when it comes to construction costs, they're able to save a lot of that because all the construction material and the machinery to build these nuclear plants are right there on the site. So this is one specific one here that we're looking at on Google Earth right now. This is the Kori plant, and there is also the Hanul nuclear power plant. So I'll show you another area in South Korea where they have a bunch of nuclear power plants. As we can see here, so this is another nuclear power plant in South Korea. And as you can see, there are some older nuclear reactors over here. There's a total of 6 older nuclear reactors there. These are 2 of the APR 1400 design nuclear power plants. So these put out 1400 megawatts each. And they're building 2 more right next to that. So this plant right here, once these 4 nuclear power plants are complete, will be the single largest nuclear power plant in the world. We're talking about 12 gigawatts of nuclear power production in a single area. And if you can see here, I mean, if we were to do, this is Google Earth right now, if I were to draw a little polygon showing how much space this takes, let me just do a big cutout here of what kind of footprint we're looking at for these nuclear power plants. I know this is a lot bigger than it actually is, but if we see how many square miles this is less than 1 square mile of land where they have 12 gigawatts. When it comes to solar, guys, right now, a square mile of land is typically about 6 to 8 megawatts of power. So if you're going to generate 6 gigawatts of power using solar, you'll need 1,000 square miles. Nuclear power plants, like I said, this is 1 square mile. And once this plant is complete, there will be 12 gigawatts of production here. So in countries like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, where you have a very, very high population density, and you don't have that much land. I mean, if we look at South Korea right now, all of South Korea is about 38,000 square miles, which is about the size of the state of Indiana. And there's 50 million people living there. If we look at Japan, Japan is about 140,000 square miles, which is a little smaller than California, mind you. And it's a little smaller than California, but has a population of about 125 million. So if you take into consideration that California, as the most populous state in the United States, is 40 million people, Japan has 3 times that. And if you see a lot of this green here, they need this green either for forest, as far as a lot of the land in Japan and South Korea. It's very mountainous land, so it's not very flat, not very practical for you to be installing and deploying a lot of solar panels in this type of terrain. And 2, it's it's mountainous, and on top of that, they need farmland. They need to produce enough food for their own respective countries. So they're not likely to deploy a bunch of solar in these countries. So I mentioned a couple weeks ago or a couple of days ago as well, when it comes to manufacturing and whatnot, and when it comes to companies like Apple requiring their supply chain to adhere to RE100 requirements and using 100% renewable energy, it's really, it is a form of colonialism. I mean, if you guys think, I know we talk about politics and whatnot in our late night sessions. We talk about, the effects and impacts of colonialism. Apple and these big tech companies requiring RE100 requirements for their manufacturing and their supply chain is the literal definition of imposing colonialist thought and requirements on their manufacturers, because obviously, as you know, most of the manufacturers that supply components for big tech companies are located in Asia, and they're basically forcing the requirement of these companies in these countries, as far as their suppliers are concerned, to be requiring renewable energy when it's not really practical to deploy renewable energy in these countries. Let me see here. These plants are huge too, Andrew. Yes, they are. In fact, if you're curious about the size of that plant here, we'll just pull up some numbers real quick. So, as I mentioned, that last one that we saw was the Hana nuclear power plant. are 6 existing nuclear power plants that are about a gigawatt each, and those 4 additional ones are going to be the APR 1400 design, almost 1400 megawatts each. So once all of that is done, there's going to be about 12 gigawatts of production at the single facility. If you saw the other locations that I was just mentioning a moment ago, the other one was Kori that we just saw as well. There's 8 nuclear reactors there. As you can see, there's some older ones. Some of those are going to be out of commission, but they're going to replace that with these new APR 1400 reactors as well. As you can see, the timeline of the construction here. So this is another nuclear power plant there. There's the Hanbit nuclear power plant, which also has 6 nuclear power plants right now. And there's the Warsaw nuclear power plant, which also has 6 nuclear power plants. So the scale of the projects in South Korea are immense. If you look at, again, the list of the largest power plants in the world right now, when it comes to nuclear power, guys, let's see here. These are the largest ones in the world. The one in Japan no longer is active. What used to be 8 gigawatts. If you saw Korea and Hunter just a moment ago, this is not including those ones that are under construction right now. So again, by the time these are done, it says 7,489 and 7,200. Both of them are going to exceed 10,000. So that's how the Koreans do it, and that's why they're able to do it cheaper than anyone else. If you look at what the costs look like for the Hana nuclear power plant right now, I will pull that up right now. So if you look at this nuclear power plant, these are brand new reactors. They're expected to cost 7 trillion won or $6 billion and to be completed by 2018. In fact, it came out to be a little less than that for 2 power plants that are 1,400 megawatts each. So if we were to do that math right now, so that one, the Vodal power plant was $34 billion for 2,200 megawatts. So it costs $15,000 per megawatt in Georgia. It ends up costing $6 billion divided by the 2 nuclear power plants in Korea together is about 2,700 megawatts. So it's costing $2.2 per watt. $2.2 compared to $15. At $2.2, nuclear power is extremely cost effective. If you take into consideration the average large-scale utility power, solar power plant right now is about $1 a watt, just under $1 a watt, and the fact that the best solar plants out there right now only have a capex ratio or capacity factor ratio of about 28%. That means they're only able to produce that power 28% of the day. So despite the fact that it's less than $1, you have to do times 4 plus the cost of batteries for solar to be competitive with nuclear. Whereas when it comes to nuclear right now, as far as the Koreans are at right now, $2,200, $2.2 per watt. The cost of operating a nuclear power plant is fairly low. It is fairly competitive with with solar when your initial capex costs are that low. So that just gives you a little bit of context on what the costs are. They really help the entire country's population. Andrew, exactly. And data farms are requiring a lot of power. Yes, Dunk. I mean, not just data farms, but especially with AI these days. If you look at how much power any of these companies like OpenAI and Microsoft is using for doing their LLM, large language model AI computation, it's staggering. It's staggering. Not just data farms, also with crypto as well. I don't know how much the current power consumption is right now when it comes to mining cryptocurrency in the world, but it is on the order of terawatt hours. I mean, it is actually making a substantial chunk out of how much the world's current power output is right now. So again, when it comes to the amount of power that's necessary to power AI data centers and just all the different services that we use for IT right now, it's staggering. It's absolutely staggering. So again, the nice thing about nuclear power plants are the fact that when it comes to base load, you know, a reliable source of power that can be up over 90%. Nuclear is kind of hard to beat in that regards. Typically, as far as the capacity factors for Korean nuclear power plants, they have historically been among the highest at 92-94%. Here in the U.S., most of our nuclear reactors are kind of on the older side right now. If you take into consideration, we had a big gap between the 3 Mile Island incident and the latest nuclear power plants that we have constructed. So unfortunately in the U.S., I'm not entirely sure what it is because I mean we talked about this on our live stream on numerous occasions about why cost of construction is so high in America. The cost of construction in Korea is not necessarily cheap when it comes to labor costs. Korea is not certainly not a cheap labor country when it comes to the cost of manufacturing. In fact, for example, Hyundai, the car company, their Ulsan plant is the world's largest integrated automotive factory in the world. And those workers there get paid higher than most of the workers here in America. In fact, the average worker in that in Ulsan car manufacturing plant right now is on the order of $100,000 a year. So again, the cost of workers in Korea is not necessarily that much cheaper than America. Korea also has very militant unions. So if you think that unions are the reason why it costs so much in America, that's not always the case either, because again, when it comes to unions in Korea, they can be militant. You know, when they don't want to do something, they will fight back and they will shut down the factory and make sure that management is locked out of the facility. So, you know, when it comes to the cost of production, um, there are certainly things that do help out. So when it comes to the land acquirement for the South Korean nuclear power plants, all the utility companies in Korea, as far as the utility provider, it is a single company, KEPCO, Korea Electric Power Company. So you do have a single monopoly there. That is privatized, by the way. So it used to be a nationally owned company, but at the moment it does operate as a private entity. But because of the fact that it is still a monopoly power company, they do work with the central government to try to push projects like this, and they can get support from the central government. Whereas here in America, you have basically utility companies that are scattered around the country, and they're all kind of doing their own thing. Again, Korea, the size of Indiana, you have a centralized system in decision making, and the fact that when it comes to the terrain of the country, again, 38,000 square miles, mostly mountainous, not much land to deploy solar. So when it comes to the ideal types of electricity that they have to produce there, you're also talking about a country that has no natural resources whatsoever in terms of fossil fuels. Korea does not have oil. It does certainly not doesn't have natural gas. There is some coal, but they're definitely doing their best to cut back on the usage of coal for their power production. So there's an incentive for them to utilize nuclear power because, again, as a country that doesn't have that much resources to deploy renewable energy, I don't think any country out there will approach carbon neutrality by 2050 without seriously pushing out nuclear fission power plants. And so I'm very, very pro-nuclear when it comes to fission power plants. I think we need more of it if we're going to have any attempt to reach our goals in terms of carbon emissions by 2050. But unfortunately, here in America, we apparently seem to have a lot of difficulty reaching that. Some guys have mentioned about the NuScale project, the SMR reactors in the state of Oregon. And it's just unfortunate because they did get green lit from the U.S. government to go ahead with the deployment of the initial power plants in the state of Idaho, and they had to pull the plug on that. Why? Because of the cost issue. I mean, when we just calculated the numbers right now with the NuScale, their nuclear reactor. Hello there, Samantha. We're going to look at the number here, and if we're talking about the nuclear reactor that NuScale was trying to build here, so let me see where the numbers are. So if you look right here, NuScale had agreements to build reactors in Idaho by 2030, but that was canceled last year due to the estimated cost having increased from 3.6 billion to 9.3 billion for a 460 megawatt power plant. So if you just saw my calculations for South Korea, $2,200 per megawatt. And as far as the NuScale project is $9.3 billion divided by 460 megawatts, comes out to $20 per watt. So $20,000 per watt. It's almost 10 times the cost of a nuclear power plant that the Koreans build. So I'm not sure how to pinpoint that. Can I ask you about your background because you're interesting information? Dunk, my background, as far as my educational background, I was one of those Genius kids. I would skip a lot of grades. I went to an Ivy League university at 15, so I never got my degree. So I am still technically a junior high school graduate. I never got my high school diploma or my college bachelor's degree. But the last 20 plus years, I've been working, doing my own business, especially with the energy sector, renewable energy, LEDs, things of that nature. So I just grew up, had a lot of buildup of knowledge in this area here. So if you have, yeah, I'm assuming that you haven't been watching my channel until today. Most of what I talk about, as far as our, our sessions here, we talk about off-grid living and living in rural America. And obviously, when it comes to the two main topics for off-grid living, the two most important things about having a homestead life is water availability and power generation. So we cover battery technology very, very often and just talk about power in general. And then our late night sessions, we kind of open it up to kind of expand upon different topics. Our late night sessions can get pretty interesting because we talk about more political stuff, you know. So we talk about things like nuclear power. If you heard me last night, so I just flew in to LAX last night, and we were talking about the People Mover project from LAX. It's a 2.5 mile track, automated people mover from the airport to the different terminals at the airport to a little transit station that's just 2.5 miles away. And the city of LA is paying over $4 billion for that. And one thing that I noticed is when I was walking over to the bus terminal, I was watching the construction workers there for about 40 minutes waiting for the damn shuttle to come by, and they're sitting around doing nothing. So we definitely have a lot of inefficiency in America. In fact, I actually have the statistics here when it comes to high-speed rail costs. So if you guys are curious about that, we'll definitely touch upon that because it is a very, very interesting topic. It will give you an idea of how crazy the costs are for different high-speed rail projects or just rail projects. It's not even necessarily high-speed rail. We're talking about rapid transit and metro stations around the world and what the cost per mile is for every single metro project that's been deployed in the past 15 years here. So if you're curious about that, we're gonna touch upon that in a moment here because I do want to talk about that topic, especially considering how expensive it is to do construction in here. I thought you did graduate from University of Pennsylvania. Why did you drop out, Andrew? If you haven't heard, the reason why was because I got kicked out of the school. They accused me of cheating in a class. There were some, I guess, some jealous students in one of my classes. They wrote emails making it look like it originated from my computer to one of the head professors at a class, telling them to change my grade. And basically, there was a whole fiasco at the University of Pennsylvania. It seemed to be racially triggered because they left some racist messages on my computer. And I did end up having an attorney in Philadelphia work for me pro bono to try to help me out. But because of the fact that University of Pennsylvania, it is a private institution, there's not much he could have done. So he did walk me through what to do and what to say, but he was like, if this was a criminal court of law, there's no evidence to basically to hold you guilty. But because of the fact that it was conducted by the Office of Student Conduct at the University of Pennsylvania, and it's all run by students that suck up to the guys that run that office there. So basically, the jury is a bunch of ass kissers. So they couldn't find enough evidence. So initially, they wanted to permanently kick me out, and then they reduced that to a 3-year suspension, reduced that to 2 year, and reduced that to 1. I did come back after a year, but I just did not feel welcome. Being at a school where they literally wanted to just outright ban you, coming back after a year, it doesn't feel very welcoming. So that's the reason why I never ended up getting my degree, Andrew. Having said that, it did definitely alter my perception on higher education and also kind of on a need for one. Because I mean, had I finished my degree there, I would have been a software developer photographer, and I honestly don't enjoy doing that. I much more enjoy talking about topics like this and doing my own, having my own time to research things like this. So I much more enjoy doing this and sharing my knowledge about these kind of things with you guys rather than if I was a software developer. So that's my background educationally. Dunk, I see you on and off grid. Yes, Dunk. So today I'm back in my office right now. I'm heading back to my ranch tonight. So the next 4 days I'll be up there showing my batteries, and we're going to be doing tinkering around a little with my batteries because there's some projects that I do intend on doing. I really need to finish wiring up some Cat 6 wires for some for my security camera and things like that. So if I have time this weekend, and unfortunately I don't have to bring my son with me this weekend, my wife is going to watch over him. I'll have a little more free time to take care of that. So people can be so malicious. I hate that. I'm sorry you went through that, Samantha. It is what it is. You know, back then as a college student, that was a devastating event for me. I mean, it felt like the world was crashing down, but having gone through events like that, I definitely believe, whatever doesn't kill you can make you stronger. It was definitely a learning experience for me, and trying to be more resilient and also be more open-minded. Again, that because of that event, it got me to be more flexible about the different types of industries to work for, and kind of expand my horizon and my train of thought when it comes to approaching the world. So I don't necessarily think it was all for the worse. Again, I've been able to do a lot of different businesses over the years. Not that I was very financially successful in any of them, but on the other hand, it has given me the ability to learn about a lot of things and share that with you guys. So Pedro says, is this a new account? Because I had already followed you. Yes, Pedro. I had to create this new account because TikTok has banned my other account from live streaming. They said my content is harmful and damaging to youth. I sit here providing this type of information, talking about power, nuclear energy, solar energy, renewable energy, talking about farm life and all that. And they said my content was damaging and exploitative of the youth. So I really don't know what to make sense of that. Again, I have had a lot of my followers mention that when it comes to talking about topics about off-grid and self-sufficiency and whatnot, TikTok can be, and any of these big tech companies, especially if you espouse any slightly conservative values, that they can be extremely aggressive about banning you. I mean, in fact, if you're curious about what it actually said, this is my other account here. You'll no longer be able to go live and join a live as a guest due to violations of our community guidelines. I've tried to appeal it multiple times, and if you see here, appeal not approved. And if you look at the violation reasons, it says youth exploitation and abuse. Allowing young people to explore and learn safely during their unique phase of development is our priority. We do not allow youth exploitation and abuse, including child sexual abuse material, nudity, grooming, sextortion, solicitation, pedophilia, and physical or psychological abuse of young people. This includes content that is real, fictional, digitally created, and shown in fine arts or objects. Visit our community guidelines for more information. Um, does any of what I'm talking about sound like I'm doing any of that? Am I sexually exploiting young children? I mean, I literally had my son with me, helping me out, showcasing what we were doing around the ranch. I had a delivery of alfalfa, a stack of 88 bales of alfalfa. I was just showing how my son helps me around when it comes to helping around with ranch duties. And be careful saying the keywords, though. Yes, Samantha. So I honestly, I still don't know what those keywords are, Samantha. But I think I remember that he was helping you take down a T. Oh, you saw that, Pedro. There weren't too many people who were watching that when I was at my last office removing those, swapping out those light bulbs for the electronic ballast at my old warehouse. So I'm surprised you remember that. But yeah, no, he was helping me. And apparently TikTok finds this type of context, this type of content to be abusive to the young. So, if you take into consideration how much content on TikTok is actually abusive to the young, I mean, you can sit around and talk about um, gender transition or that kind of stuff without any worries about getting censored, or you can talk about I don't know. I mean, you can talk about, I mean, there's plenty of other live streams out there where there's girls showing too much skin, or people pulling stupid pranks, and that kind of stuff is, you can't say the actual word even in discussing what they said. Yeah, Sebastian, I really don't know what that even word is. So I don't know if I really learned much from that event. And if they ban me, then I'll just have to create a new account and continue as is, because I've learned the only way to fight against censorship is just to keep at it. I don't know how much they can keep banning content like myself, but at the very least, I will do what I can to also, you know, do my live streams on other platforms. I think this one is actually being shown on YouTube right this moment as well. I think your content is very informational. And yeah, Pedro, I mean, I try to keep things informational. I try to keep things intellectually stimulating. And if you guys have heard, even our late night sessions when we talk about more politically sensitive stuff, I try to be as objective as possible. Again, if you have heard me talk about renewable energy or big oil, um, I like presenting the facts. I like presenting numbers because the facts are harder to lie. The saying facts don't lie, but I mean, these days there's a lot of companies and institutions out there that do manipulate facts as well. So that is certainly a challenge. Thomas just asked, are the French good with nuclear cost-wise? Unfortunately, Thomas, they're not. They're not. When it comes to Arriva, the French used to be. The French, if you look at France right now, almost 80% of their electricity comes from nuclear power. So when it came down to the whole conflict between Russia and Ukraine, they haven't been impacted as much as their neighboring countries like Germany, who has relied on cheap Russian gas to get them through. Which again, we talked about that as well. The whole trigger for all that, by the way, was the Fukushima incident, 2011 in Japan. When that happened, I don't know why, of all places, Germany had a knee-jerk reaction to decide to cut down on nuclear power. It's one thing for Japan to say, okay, we're going to shut down on nuclear power, and even the Japanese right now, they're like, oh, wait a minute, we don't have enough land in Japan right now to produce all of our power from renewable energy. So they're actually, Japan is in the process of actually deploying and recertifying, relicensing the operations of their nuclear power plants, because if they're going to have any potential chance of meeting the 2050 requirements, Kyoto Protocol and whatnot, they need nuclear power right now. I don't know why the Germans decided, hey, you know what, we're going to shut down our nuclear power plants. But right when that happened, the Russians dangled a carrot with cheap natural gas, and that's why they built those natural gas pipelines from Russia over to Germany. And after the whole, shitstorm between Russia and Ukraine right now, they got screwed with very high, expensive natural gas costs. So, Thomas, it's a great question that you had there, but unfortunately, when it comes to nuclear power for the French right now, if you're curious about where their costs are, I mean, if you just saw me do the calculations for the plant in Georgia, the Vogtle power plant, coming at about $20, $15 to $20 per watt. If you're curious about the Hinkley power plant that's in the UK right now, so this Hinkley power plant, they were supposed to do this with Arriva. So if you look here, this is the power plant in the UK, and Arriva, being the French company, initially estimated that electricity could be produced at a competitive price of 24 pounds per megawatt hour. If they did, it would have been competitive. If they did bring it down to 24 pounds per megawatt hour, that is roughly about 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So if that's roughly how much electricity nuclear power in the U.S. costs right now, Thomas. So any of the existing legacy plants in the United States right now, as far as nuclear power plants, are roughly 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, if you look at the number off to the right here, construction cost, 31 to 35 billion dollars in 2015 prices. That's that's for two nuclear power plants that are 1630 megawatts each. So again, if you want me to do the math for that, I don't know. Let me see what the Great British Pound to USD rates are right now is $1.27 for 1 pound. So let's use that 31 billion number. 31 billion times 1 point, what was it, about $1.3 per pound, and divide that by 3260 megawatts planned. You're at $12 per watt for these nuclear power plants. And to be frank, that's 2015 prices. By the time all is said and done, they're estimating the cost will actually exceed over 40 billion. 40 billion. So I don't know what's going to happen with this nuclear power plant, guys. I mean, they're estimating costs right now at 22 pounds or 92.5 pounds per megawatt hour, which would put it at about 13 cents per kilowatt hour. And again, it's still not the construction is still not done yet. You know, so going back to your question, the French with the new design, the nuclear power plant design. So this plant that they were trying to develop here was supposed to be the new European design, the next generation European design. And there were a lot of things that they were trying to do experimentally for this nuclear reactor, but it turned out to be a lot more complex than they had originally expected and anticipated. So this reactor type, if you look here, is the EPR reactor. This is the new nuclear reactor design, Generation 3 Plus, developed by Framatome, part of Areva between 2001 and 2017, and the EDF and Siemens of Germany. So it was called the European Pressurized Reactor, and the internationalized name was the Evolutionary Power Reactor, named EPR. So this was supposed to be the new nuclear reactor design that the Europeans licensed for operation in Europe, and it's supposed to be, substantially more reliable than, older Generation 2 reactors. But again, they could not bring down the cost on this. The Chinese, which by the way, the first of the EPR design was done in Taishan in China. So if you look here, the Chinese were able to build these reactors at a reasonable price. So if you look at the Taishan nuclear reactor here and what kind of reactors they have the EPR 1750. If you look at the units that are operating power right now, so these are actually operational in China right now. They're producing 3.3 gigawatts of power, and if we look at what the cost was to build these power plants here, I don't know if they mention it here. Let's take a look. Let's see here. Doesn't look like they have the numbers here, but we can look it up. Oh, it says right here, construction cost, $7.5 billion for 3.3 gigawatts of capacity. So that's pretty close to what the Koreans are building right now. So again, $7.5 billion divided by, what was that, 3320 megawatts. So about the same. $2.2 per megawatt, or $2.2 per watt. So at that kind of price point, it is cost effective to do nuclear. But again, at $15, $20 per watt of in terms of capex cost to build out the plant, that really ruins the numbers to produce power using nuclear power plants. So, Thomas, I hope that answers your question. Don't you think the investment's still worth the cost for reliability? I mean, Dunk. As far as base loads are concerned, I think despite the price premium of nuclear reactors, I definitely do think so. I think you're the one that pointed out about the capacity factors of these nuclear of solar power plants. If you look here, by the way, if you look at the Taishan plant, the capacity factor, it's not all that great either. These are nuclear power plants, 52, 74%, 66, 81. That's not particularly good for a nuclear power plant. And why? Because this EPR design is a new nuclear power plant design, and there's a lot of issues to work out. So when it comes to the reliability of these particular nuclear power plants, there's a lot of kinks to work out. So again, Dunk, as far as your particular question, the older generation nuclear power plants, as I mentioned, the Korean design using the OPR 1000 and the CANDO design, they have been operating, the capacity factor has been north of 90%. But with some of these the new nuclear reactor designs right now, because of the fact that they're fairly new, because of the fact that there's still a lot of unknowns that have to be worked out, they're not particularly, they're not quite there as far as reliability is yet. But I mean, even if we're talking 52 to 66%, that's still better than solar. Again, we're talking about capex capacity factor for solar. Let's just do a quick Google search on that capacity factor for the best solar PV plants out there. Globally, it's been about 16.9%. So I think, Dunk, you mentioned 17 or 18 earlier. That's roughly around right. If you look at what the actual solar capex or capacity factor in the United States has been in the past 12 months, in 2021, it's been 24.4%. So again, it just depends on where. Typically, again, if you're in these states over here, it's going to be closer to 30%. If you can see, obviously in the Northeast area, you're going to have a lot lower numbers. So again, when I talk about solar in the context I'm usually talking about is in the Southeast, American Southeast, because we have a lot of desert land here that's not really useful for any other application. We have a lot of land in California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, where if we were to convert some of that to solar, we would still have plenty of land left over. We're talking about how much electricity all of the United States needs. If you look at the United States as far as electricity demand, it comes out to 4,000 terawatt hours in 2023. If we look at how much the average production is on a given moment, I believe it comes out to roughly around 2 terawatts of generation capacity. Let me see if I can pull up that number, by the way, just so you guys have some context about the basics of how much power the United States uses. So as far as energy in the United States is concerned, our nameplate capacity is 1,200 gigawatts of power production. And if you look at where that power is coming from right now, 36.1% from petroleum. This is the entire, including transportation sectors. So if we're strictly talking about the electricity, obviously that petroleum portion is going to go down quite a bit. But again, when it comes to the production of power, we're roughly at about 1,200 gigawatts of power production. And if we were to convert that into solar, basically, as we mentioned just a moment ago, at 30% to capacity factor, basically divide 1,200 by 0.3. So we would need about 4 terawatts of generation capacity with solar panels. So if we're talking about 4 terawatts, that's 4 million megawatts. And 1 acre of land can produce about 6 to 10 megawatts of power. So if we were to divide this by 640 acres, we would need about 6,250. I take that back, guys. Sorry. What was it? 4 million? 4 million, and divide that by about 6 is how many acres of land that we would need to generate all of our electricity using solar. And if we divide this by 640, now that can't be right either. I screwed up on a number somewhere. It should come out to roughly around 30,000 square miles of land. So let me just take a quick look. Acres, megawatt of solar per acre. So if we look here, 1 megawatt of solar energy requires about 10 acres of land. So I did the number, it was reciprocated. So 1 megawatt, you would need 10 acres of land. So again, if we're talking 4 million megawatts, that means we would need about 10 times that divided by 640, which would be about 62,000 square miles. So again, all the power that we would need in the United States right now can be produced in about 60,000 square miles of land, which, as we've discussed on our channel before, the state of Nevada, about 120,000 square miles, 80% of that being federal land. There's plenty of federally owned land in the American Southwest where we can convert that all to produce all the power that America needs. So it is absolutely possible and doable to do. You know, again, as far as the cost of solar panels and the cost trajectory of battery storage right now, it is constantly going down. We talk about batteries quite often on our channel here, and at the moment right now, going back to your question, Dunk, when it comes to battery storage right now, typically, we're right around $10 per megawatt hour of about $100. So it's about 10 cents per kilowatt hour of power generation if you factor in the battery portion. So if your PPA for solar is 2 cents, the battery storage is basically multiplied by 5. So it would require 12 cents per kilowatt hour for battery plus solar right now. And as I just mentioned, nuclear should have been 4 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, but because of the fact that all the construction costs have been out of control, as we just saw a moment ago in the UK right now with that Hinkley project at 13 cents per kilowatt hour, it's literally cheaper to deploy solar with batteries than it is a nuclear power plant. So that's kind of where the challenge is right now. I am an absolute proponent of nuclear fission power. And again, there are countries out there that are doing it right, and they're able to do it under at a reasonable cost. If we look at some of the numbers, I don't have the PDF with me right now, but we can look up cost per watt. There is some great resources out there that I used to look at. Let me see if I can pull up some of the statistics out there, because when it comes to the cost per watt, it does not have to be that it doesn't have to be that high. There are plenty of other countries out there that are doing it on a very cost-effective basis. Again, it's just unfortunate that here in America we can't get our costs under control. So that's what the main issue is with the United States right now. We're just not able to do anything in terms of cost-wise with construction. We're just not able to do it at a reasonable price point than other countries. I'm gonna go touch upon the rail cost per mile in a moment here, but let me see if I can pull up some basic numbers here. There was some really great resources that I just don't recall where I saved that file right now. So, you know, I've been doing a lot of research on this, obviously, and there's some great resources out there that show what the cost of power is for the various different places around the world. If you actually look at that chart out there, the cost of nuclear in countries like South Korea and China is among the lowest in the world at close to about $3 per watt. Let's hire these countries to build our plants then. Thomas, so even for the NuScale project, NuScale is the SMR reactor. That's supposed to be the small modular reactors. These are much smaller reactors that are compact. And if you look at the two companies in the U.S. that's pushing SMRs right now, you have NuScale. NuScale is the company based out of Oregon, and then there's TerraPower, which is the one that Bill Gates has invested in. And if you see who has partnered up with these companies, the Koreans have investment in both of them. Doosan has an investment in NuScale. Even TerraPower, I believe it was SK. Let me just let's do a quick Google search on that. TerraPower, Wikipedia. Let's see as far as the investments of who invested in TerraPower. So again, TerraPower is a manufacturer of SMRs, and if you see here, the SK Group agreed to invest $250 million in 2022, led by SK Incorporated and SK Innovation and Gates. So again, the Koreans are participating with both TerraPower and also with NuScale as well. NuScale is, again, as I mentioned, it's invested by Doosan, which is, so they posted a video not too long ago, I think on Facebook and Instagram, of them actually forging the nuclear reactor vessels for NuScale. Let me see if it shows up here. So if you look here, as far as NuScale, Doosan Enerbility was contracted to begin manufacturing power module components. That company, Doosan, they're one of the few companies in the world that can actually cast the nuclear reactor vessels. These are typically 4,000 plus ton single cast units, and there's only about four um, 4 steel makers around the world that can actually build it. So even in the United States, we can't build our own right now in America right now. So even for NuScale, we're using Tucson to manufacture the pressure vessels for these SMRs. If we're building any new nuclear power plants in the United States right now, we have to use a pressure vessel from another country right now. So again, when it comes to construction costs, we do have some of our hands tied into with the unions here, as far as with all the red tape, making sure there's a lot of requirements. I mean, if you have seen even TSMC with their manufacturing fab in Phoenix, Arizona, TSMC, Taiwanese companies, these companies based out of Taiwan, Japan, and Korea, they get shit done quickly. They don't have patience for people sitting around and being lazy. And when TSMC was building the plant in Phoenix, one, they were complaining, hey, you don't have enough educated workers in America that have experience building these fabs. So they wanted to bring over their own workers from Taiwan to help speed things along. And that's when the union complained to them and brought that up to the state, saying, hey, TSMC is bringing in workers from Taiwan to help out with things. It's the same situation happened with Samsung with their Taylor plant. The same situation happened with SK and their battery factory over in the state of Kentucky as well. So when it comes to Asian companies and how they operate, I mean they are ruthlessly efficient when it comes to manufacturing. They do not put up with that kind of crap. And if they have, if we leave, if here in America we leave these Asian companies with a sour taste in their mouth when it comes to manufacturing in America, they're not going to want to invest here anymore. So that's one of the main issues. Going back to what you said, let's hire these countries. Um, I don't mind doing that because again, they are able to do it much more efficiently. But for example, here in California, they actually did hire the Chinese to build the high-speed rail in California. But even if the Chinese were to build it here in California, because of all the red tape, they will not be able to build it in time, and they will not be able to build it in budget. I heard a story about that. California spent billions of dollars for the homeless problem, but they don't know where that money went. Yeah, Goyo, that's um, considering the billions of dollars that were spent on the homeless here in even just LA County alone, our homeless population went up the past 10 years. So clearly it hasn't done anything. And then on top of that, Proposition 1 earlier this year, $6.4 billion to address homelessness for 10,000 people. Come on, it's not going to do anything either, right? So that's definitely a huge issue. But again, if you guys are curious, let me go into a little segue about the cost of rail in America. So if you look here, that's LA, San Francisco, and New York. This yellow over here is the cost per kilometer. So if you see New York here, we're in the billions of dollars per kilometer right now. Even in LA right now, it's in the $444 million per mile of rail. This one right here is part of LA as well at $857 million per kilometer of rail. So again, this right here is the cost of rail in the United States, which again, if you take into consideration, there are other countries around the world that have high cost of labor. I mean, Germany is one of those countries where it's pretty expensive. This right here is Paris. Paris, the French have very strong unions. Their cost per mile is very high for Europe. If you look at the numbers here, it ranges from 79 million to $367 million per kilometer of rail. Again, this is for Paris here in France. If you're curious about what the numbers look like for, let's see, other countries here. For example, Italy here, this is right here is the cost for Rome and Milan. It's anywhere between 70 million to about 414 million. If we look at some other countries on this list, for example, this right here is all of Germany. And if you look here, it costs as little as 30 million. That's an extension. That's a really old project. It was based in 1974. So that's an outlier. But as far as all these other projects here, you can see that the cost per mile is about 200 to 300 million dollars. How about Mexico? Goya, if you're curious, let's see if they have any statistics on Mexico here. So there's two projects in Mexico City and Guadalajara, and it came out to about $155 million and $254 million per kilometer, which again, it's fairly reasonable. I mentioned Korea quite often on our channel here. This right here is the range for South Korea. If you look here, anywhere as low as 28 million to 187 million there. So again, Korea is not exactly a low labor cost country. Japan, these cells right here are for Japan, anywhere as low as 51 million to 535 million. And again, take into consideration, Japan is going to be a little higher just because they have to deal with seismic issues. So, there are some countries that have to deal with that. South Korea doesn't have any earthquakes to really be concerned about. So that's why the numbers are very competitive. If you want to look at what the numbers for China looks like, all these numbers here are all for China. It's in the $100 to $200 million per kilometer range. So if you look at the cost in China as well, their costs are not necessarily that much better than South Korea is. It's not necessarily that much better than a lot of European countries are. So again, despite the fact that labor costs are pretty low in China, if you look at the numbers here, these are all for China right here. I'm going to highlight as much of China as possible. These are all up to about this right here. So all these numbers here are all from China. And if you see here, the average numbers are between 100 to 200 million dollars per kilometer in China as well. So again, it's not that much cheaper in China compared to, let's see here, this is Spain, all of Spain right here. If you look here, the numbers for Spain is actually even lower than China. And these three here are for Finland. These numbers here are for France. These numbers right here are for India. So if you look here, India is roughly along the lines of some of these other countries. It's not necessarily any cheaper, despite the fact that labor costs in India can be pretty cheap. I have to go now, but I'm glad I came across your live again and subscribe to your YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Pedro. Are labor rates the most costly in these projects? Chinese are busy with rail. What country has the highest and lowest? Goyo, it's hard to say just because of the fact that each of these projects can be very, very different. So I don't want to make any generalizations with these numbers that we have here, because if you take a consideration here, they take into consideration what percentage of the length is tunneled, what percentage is at grade, what percentage is elevated. So all those factors will make a huge impact on the cost. So obviously, a project that's on level grade is going to be a hell of a lot cheaper than a project that's elevated, which is going to be even cheaper than a project that has to be tunneled. So again, that's why it's very difficult to compare these numbers on an apples to apples basis, because again, these projects are all very, very different geographically with the local environmental conditions. So I don't have any specific numbers, but I mean, as far as I can tell you, I can guarantee you United States is the most expensive out of these. And again, it doesn't have to be. There's no reason why it's so damn expensive in America. So again, these are the numbers right here for the first one there is Seattle, 344 million, LA, 857 million, 571, 444, 566, 618. That 618 is for Boston. That 1270 right there is for the BART line to from BART to San Jose between 2024 and 2036. So it's going to be a little over $1 billion per mile of track. That is absolutely, absolutely insane what the costs look like in America right now. So again, these numbers right here are for Taiwan. Taiwan, they're seismically active in all of their regions. So again, that's why the numbers look a little higher. That's 857 million per mile. Yes, Goyo, this is per mile, the cost of these different projects. So that just goes to show how absolutely insane the costs are in America. As I mentioned, the people mover, that they're building right now. If you saw me at the airport a few days ago at LAX, this is literally 2.25 miles of track, and the cost for this project is on the order of $4.9 billion dollars. So $4.9 billion dollars for 2.25 miles of track, Goyo. That's not 857 million per mile. That's $2 billion dollars per mile. So um, it's I don't understand how costs can be spiraling out of control like that. As I mentioned, and when I went to the airport, I was watching those construction workers. They're sitting around doing nothing. They're sitting around doing nothing. The unions have it so good. Um, there's literally people that they hire that just sit around to do nothing. There's actually, I can't remember who wrote that article about the cost of rail in New York City. It's not just because of inflation, Braveheart. Inflation alone cannot, explain that kind of ridiculous cost. Because I mean, inflation has impacted the whole world. It's not just America that got hit. If America, is suffering from inflation, what's that going to do for the rest of the world? The rest of the world uses the dollar standard, right? So if America pushes inflation, the rest of the world is going to be impacted by that as well. So our money is worth so much more than anyone else's. Yeah, Braveheart, that's what I meant. We're on the dollar standard. So if America experiences inflation, it's going to impact those other guys more. So that's why, it's not a matter of inflation. Is this a federal project? Goyo, no, the LAX Automated People Mover is not a federal project. It is owned by LA World Airports, which is far. I'm not exactly sure if that's a government entity. It is an airport authority that owns and operates LAX, established in 1928 as the LA Department of Airports. So I guess it is operated by the city. Regulation, let's see here. So they raised their prices. Again, inflation, I'm not going to say that inflation has no impact. Of course it does. But that still doesn't explain why a mile of track costs $2 billion dollars when we have plenty of other places around the world that have high labor costs. So if the cost of concrete has gone up here or the cost of steel has gone up here, it's going to impact the cost anywhere else in the world. You mentioned they raised their prices. Steel is a worldwide commodity. You're not going to find cheaper steel in America than anywhere else in the world. It's all internationally traded commodities. So again, when it comes to raw material costs for any of these materials that are involved with construction, U.S. is actually, we have the luxury of having a lot of that stuff made here, and it's as far as the cost of building material, concrete and whatnot, it's not necessarily that much more expensive than us having to pay to import concrete from other parts of the world. Shipping costs for concrete is certainly not cheap. So when it comes to steel, yes, we do import some of that, and it is a little cheaper from Asian countries, and that's why the Biden administration put all those tariffs up against Chinese steel and whatnot. Chinese have a huge overcapacity of steel right now. Chinese produce 60%, over 60% of the world's steel. And they required that at one point because they were manufacturing, and they were not manufacturing, they were building so many apartments for their own people, and then the real estate market got heated, and then all of a sudden they don't have enough need or demand for all these apartments. So that's kind of what the issue is there. America is almost at $35 trillion in debt. Does California have a state debt? Yes, Goyo. Most states actually have a debt. California is growing. State budgets are substantially smaller than federal budgets proportionally per capita. So again, when you talk about $35 trillion of debt, that's over $100,000 per capita. When it comes to the figures for the individual states, it's substantially lower than that. So if you're curious what that budget number looks like, let's do a quick look here. Let me see, California. For 2023, the state budget was $454 billion. And there was a $45 billion deficit. And if we look at what the overall deficit is for California is right now, they don't really show that information. But there's definitely a sizable deficit that California has. So let me see here. Also, they inflate prices so everyone can pocket more. Braveheart, yeah. When it comes to construction in America and just the fat that the inefficiency that can be ripped out, it's immense. It's immense. Cost per mile, New York versus Paris. There was a wonderful article um, a while back that was talking about the cost of mass transit between New York and Paris. And let me see if I can find that article, guys, because it's a really, really good article that shows the difference in terms of cost. So I think, I'm not sure if this was it. So at the time, New York was building the Second Avenue subway for an estimate of $2.5 billion per mile. Paris was building subways for 250 million per kilometer, some 10 times less. The more Levy looked, the more they found New York wasn't just paying more for subways than every other cities, but many times more. And if you're looking at hiring, so the combination of hiring contractors to do the work in a manner so bizarre it almost seems intentionally designed to drive up costs, hiring consultants to design and manage projects rather than having the staff to do so in-house, haphazardly coordinating complicated work with local utilities, viewing infrastructure projects as job programs and therefore hiring more workers than needed, union, non-union, blue collar, and white collar, over designing project stations in particular, and on top of it all, having local politicians who micromanage, slowing down, planning at best, charging projects in a way that makes them more expensive and less useful at worst. So, Goyo, this is exactly why the costs are so high here in America compared to anywhere else in the world. Again, when it comes to unions and whatnot, Paris, the French have very, very strong unions as well, and they looked at the cost overall. And if you look at the itemized cost of concrete, so on and so forth, it turns out that Americans were just getting shafted left and right. So crypto, it's the only thing capable of competing with USD. Blake, um, well, I guess it just kind of comes down to what happens with crypto. If we have to rely, I mean, if we have, like, for example, we talk about EMPs and whatnot. If we have a nuclear war, then crypto will be pretty worthless too, because we're not going to have enough electricity to sit there and run these devices and do crypto transactions. So, again, it depends on what you. I mean, I'm not into crypto much, but if you guys want to diversify your portfolio and have some money in crypto, I can't say that's a bad idea. I mean, you shouldn't put all your money in one thing anyways, all your eggs in one basket anyways. So it can't hurt to have 10, 20, 25% of your holdings in crypto. If you feel like investing in it, by all means do it. But again, if something major were to happen, you say that it's capable of competing with USD, but let's face it, crypto is only around because of the US dollar. That's what gives crypto value. Without the US dollar, there is no value in crypto by itself. So that's what a lot of people fail to realize is the value that crypto has right now requires everyone else to trade crypto. If not, it's no better of a currency than the US dollar is. I mean, again, the power of the US dollar is anyone that holds a dollar bill can go anywhere around the world and spend that dollar, and someone will see the inherent value in that. It's difficult to do that with crypto, especially among the various different types of crypto that you have. If you want to trade with your neighbor who doesn't have the same cryptocurrency that you have, is it possible? Is it doable when the US dollar collapses? I don't know. So I don't have answers to that. So UHD said crypto is a scam. I don't want to go as far as saying that it's a scam, but it's certainly an alternative. But I don't want to put any more faith in it than any other currency out there. So permits, yes. View on this sounds like greed, ways around that. Yeah, US dollar is the top global currency. Yes, over 60% of all the world trade is done on the US dollar. So again, if we ever get to a point, I mean, I know we talk about this pretty often on our channel. If we ever get to a point where the US dollar collapses, we're going to have bigger things to worry about than whether you have cryptocurrency or not. If the US dollar collapses, basically every other currency out there will collapse too. So it's only USD that can be traded for crypto. That's not how it works. No, I know it's not how it works, Blake. You can transfer any other currency out there, but my point is, if the US dollar were to collapse, every other currency will collapse as well. What's the value in every other currency right now? It's the fact that you can trade that against the US dollar. So again, I'm not saying it depends on how things collapse, and again, if there was a nuclear war, then the last thing, the biggest thing you should worry about is not whether or not someone's going to take crypto or not. All right, so again, it depends on what kind of catastrophe that leads up to the point where the U.S. dollar collapses. But again, if the U.S. dollar collapses, the last of my concern is going to be whether or not we have crypto or not. Again, who are you going to trade crypto with? I mean, there's, again, enough people have to have it out there for it to have value, which again, that percentage is growing out there. So I'm not here to disregard what you're saying, Blake. If everyone does trade crypto, there's a small possibility that it can become a viable alternative currency, but it really depends on the circumstances of why the U.S. dollar or other currencies collapse. So that's I'm just gonna leave it at that. You know, so if the U.S. dollar collapses, that means we won't be able to print our money as fast as we are right. Yeah, and the U.S. debt crisis will be extreme if the dollar collapses. I mean, Young La, again, if the U.S. dollar collapses, it's the ramifications that every other currency is going to collapse out there because they rely on the U.S. dollar to trade around the world. So unless, I mean, a lot of guys ask me what my thoughts are on the BRICS initiative, at least with asset-backed currency, but that's not, you know, as far as I'm aware right now, it hasn't taken off yet. There's going to have to be enough people using it, and it's only going to be of value among the people that use it anyways. So a lot of people ask me what my thoughts are on, gold-backed assets or precious metal-backed assets. Well, let's say the dollar went to shit right now, you know, and you want to trade something with your neighbor. Is he going to accept gold from you? Maybe he will, maybe he won't. And how are you going to sit there? Are you going to sit there and take a little knife and chop off a little piece of gold to trade? Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I mean, that's what it's going to come down to. I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen if the currency were to collapse. At least again with the U.S. dollar and actually having cash bills, you can trade that. Actually having quarters and coins, you can actually tradable. That's tradable anywhere in the United States. If you go to any airport around the world with U.S. dollars, it has value. But again, if the U.S. dollar were to collapse, I really don't know what's going to happen, and I don't want to sit here and dwell too much upon that because we can sit around and hash that out as much as we want, but the real reality of the situation is nobody knows. Do you think we can have another Great Depression? Absolutely, Goyo. Why can't it happen? $35 trillion in debt, and more projects like this, and inflation at the rate it is right now, despite the fact that the Dow hit what 40,000, it's a meaningless 40,000. So, is it possible? Absolutely. Depends on. I mean, I don't know how severe it would be. I think we're certainly overdue for a correction, but how severe and how long, I really don't know. I think I definitely think it can happen. There's really no reason why. You know, we don't. The numbers are not as strong. The fundamentals are not as strong as the media makes it out to be. I mean, again, you have an administration that's saying, "Oh, inflation's not that bad. Inflation's not that bad," when consumer good prices have, I don't know. Go look at how much price of food has gone up, or the price of gasoline has gone up in the last 5 years. It's the CPI that the media and the government puts out. It's easy to manipulate that as far as the numbers are concerned. And basically every country, it's not just the United States, every other country out there where they put out CPI numbers from their central government, they've all been bullshitting. I mean, I've had friends from Korea and Taiwan come by recently, and we're talking about that. They're like, they don't trust the CPI numbers coming out of their own respective countries because it doesn't add up. Look at how much food prices have gone up. So my Shiba Inu coins will buy the essentials. What do you think will happen if China collapses? Um, if China collapses, that's a good question, Goyo. I really don't know. Um, their their government's debt ratio is lower than the U.S. right now, so it's less likely for theirs to happen to the U.S. right now. But having said that, the biggest concern for China in the long run is the demographics issue. They are has one of the lowest birth rates in the world right now. You have an aging population. If you go in, if you go go to China, and you see who the construction workers are, who's out there cleaning streets and whatnot, they're all people who are in their 40s and 50s, if not older. You don't have any young people doing that. And those guys, as soon as they get out of the workforce in 10, 20 years from now, there aren't going to be enough younger generation to replace them. So, despite the fact that China grew rapidly in the last 20 years, and it's slowing down right now, with the demographic situation that they have right now, basically what happened to Japan in the late 90s can happen to them. The same thing with South Korea and Taiwan as well. These countries relied a lot on their cost of low labor, and they again because of that they spent so much money on R&D and invested heavily in tech and whatnot, so it can kind of hedge against that. But the question is whether or not that will be enough for them. So bottle caps. No, he will just take your gold if he's bigger than you. Thomas, yeah. Bullets and cigs. Yeah, exactly. For us, especially for the prepper types, ammunition is probably more valuable than anything else, right? So, sorry, you look too much like Ryuhei Yoshima. I don't know who that is. I'm gonna look into that. um, this is a Japanese comedian and actor. I look like that. That's pretty funny. Um, I've never heard that, but I don't know if that's a compliment. um, they really made a bad mistake creating the two children per family law. No, Goyo, it was a one child policy. It wasn't a two children per family. It was a one child policy, and they did finally get rid of that not too long ago. But despite the fact that they got rid of that, the reality is nobody wants to have two children in China either because the cost of raising children is so damn high in China. The same problem in South Korea, same problem in Taiwan right now. South Korea having the lowest birth rate in the world. Last year was like zero point 0.7, zero point 0.7. So if you look at South Korea's birth rate, um, as of 2023 here, if you look at the number right there, 2023 it was 0.72. So China is on track to get that low as well. That means every other woman has one child. Yeah, basically, Thomas. Basically, it means they're just not having children. People are not getting married. People are just not having children, and it's too expensive to have them. I heard U.S. Is having a low birth rate also. Yes, a birth rate around the world is definitely going down, Goyo. But the U.S. still has the U.S.'s birth rate is still higher than most of the developed world. So if we want to look at OECD birth rates, um, let's take a quick look at the chart here. I'm just going to Google it real quick, guys, so that we have some numbers to work with. I hate these charts that are really hard to make out. So let's see this PDF. If you look at this chart here, when it comes to OECD countries here, where's the United States? United States is right over here right now, so it's on the higher than the OECD average. Israel being the highest, South Korea being the lowest when it comes to the fertility rates of these various different countries. Having said that, that blue line there is as of 2021. Africa is high still, yes, Thomas. All the population growth that's going to happen in the next 50 years will come from Africa. Europe, obviously, the population is declining. Eastern Asia population will be declining. The Americas, North America will definitely be declining. South America might be at least holding still. There were some very interesting projections that were put out by the UN when it comes to the biggest top 100 cities, metropolitan areas by 2050. It was kind of interesting because they said cities like Lagos are going to be number one with populations in the 30 to 50 million, if not higher range. I mean, we can do a quick look on the population projections for the next some odd years here. they did say, let me try to pull up some of the numbers here. For example, they think by 2050, let me see, this is not the one that I wanted to pull up. When it comes to African megacities, by 2050, they think cities like Cairo will be 32.6 million, Lagos will be 28.2 million, Kinshasa will be 29 million, Nairobi 10 million, Dar es Salaam 16.4 million, Khartoum 11.2. There are some other estimates that are substantially higher than that. I forget. So, for example, by 2100, which cities will be the largest? The UN actually did a projection. By 2100, it was Lagos, as I mentioned earlier. 88 million people in one city, guys. Kinshasa, 84 million. Dar es Salaam, 74 million. Khartoum in Sudan, 57 million. That's New York City is expected to be 30 million. In Tokyo, Japan, 26 million. Shanghai, China, by 2100, year 2100, is going to go down to 21 million because of the low birth rate. I don't even know how that's even possible, guys. I mean, 88 million people living in one city. The tremendous amount of resources that would, as far as the strain on resources that would place on the surrounding neighboring areas will be. It's hard for me to even fathom right now, except for African Americans like popcorn spitting them out for welfare. I mean, yeah, Lynn, that goes to, well, when it comes to birth rate in America right now, I think Hispanics and African Americans are definitely the highest. I think Asians in America are already lower than the whites in America. I mean, if we can definitely take a look at that too if you guys are curious. I don't know if they break it out by by every single ethnicity out there right now, but if you're curious as to what the birth rate and the fertility rate in America is right now, Hispanic is 41.3 per 1,000 women. Black is 38.7. And as you can see there, yeah, Asian is lower than American, Indian, or white. So those are the numbers. So, I mean, we're not talking huge variations. So I know when people say things like spitting them out for welfare, that number, the difference between blacks and whites is less than 10%. So, you know, I think that's a little egregious to say that they're spitting them out because, again, are there individuals that are doing that? Absolutely, absolutely. But are they doing that as a whole? We're talking less than 10% difference. So that's what I can say about that. Why is South Korea the lowest, Goyo? It's because of the cost of living out there. The cost of living for the younger generation, considering how much they make, it's very, very challenging. The younger generation, they have very, very differing outlooks on the rest of their lives. So they'd rather, you know, it's kind of unfortunate because they don't value family life as much anymore when it comes to these Asian societies. Considering how conservative they used to be when it came to family values, these days they don't want anything to do with that. So it's there's multiple factors. Definitely economics playing a role, but even culturally speaking, there is definitely a dramatic change. Not just in South Korea, but as I mentioned, Japan, Taiwan, China as well. And again, despite the fact that even countries like Vietnam have a pretty decent birth rate right now, it's going to slow down dramatically for them as well. So it's just the cost of living, and proportionally compared to 1 to 2 generations ago. I mean, we talk about America as well. How 2 generations ago you can buy a house for what, $10,000, and your annual pay would be $3,000, so you can afford to buy an average home, and that that number, that multiple differential between the cost of real estate and your average salary. Here in LA right now, it's already more than 10 to 1. If we look at some of the other countries out there, like in places in Korea and places in China, it's 20 to 1, 30 to 1. In India right now, New Delhi, it's 50 to 1. So whatever your income is, multiply that by 50 is how much the average home costs. So even though India is a developing country, their birth rate will plummet soon as well, just because they can't afford to have children. So let me go through some of these other comments here. Is the number one reason South Korea population is low due to economic high inflation? Um, it's I don't want to say it's number one reason, Goyo. There's South Korea is kind of unique in the sense that because it's such a small country with such a high population density, they spend so much money on children's education. The cost of raising a child is expensive because everyone's so competitive that they're paying a lot in terms of private tuition for their children, and that cost might end up being $1,500, $2,000 a month for a family that makes less money than here in the United States. So um, if if there was a societal change kind of relaxing the requirements to as far as schooling and as far as pressuring children, and this is also the reason why the suicide rate is so high in Korea, because of the fact that you have such high competition between people in such a small amount of space. Um, it's getting a little better in that regards. I mean, people are exploring that there are other jobs that you can do that doesn't necessarily require high test scores and things like that. So it's good to see that there are some variations there. But again, we're talking about 50 million people living in the area the size of Indiana. It's going to be competitive no matter what. So those are the main reasons behind that. So it's becoming more of a Western style thinking. There is definitely some Western style influence, Goyo, for any of these countries. But again, the main reason for those countries that I specifically mentioned when it comes to South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, they're extremely competitive population. If you look at even the older generation in Japan, for example, how many of the businessmen, they just die from overexhaustion and overwork. That's considered normal in those countries. So again, you had Japan that at one point was rivaling the entire United States in terms of GDP back in the late 80s, and and then Japan, the bubble popped, it collapsed. Some of that was due to American intervention when it comes to applying tariffs on Japanese imports, just like how the U.S. is seeing China as a competitor right now. When it came down to the electronics that was coming in from Japan, when it came down to the car industry, car manufacturers from Japan, the U.S. saw the Japanese as a threat, so they started slapping tariffs on them and made it much more difficult for Americans to import Japanese goods, and that's exactly what the U.S. is applying on China right now. But that combination, along with the fact that their birth rate was declining, you had an entire lost generation in Japan. Basically, if you were born in the 90s up until this point, they have no future. The younger generation has no future to look forward to. So that happened first in Japan. I want to say Korea is basically about a 20-year offset from that compared to what Japan went through. So that same thing that happened in Japan in 1990s is essentially what Korea is going through right now in 2010 onwards. That slower level of growth. If you guys have seen the rate of growth for Japan's economy prior to 1990, it was incredible. And you can say the same thing about South Korea between 1980 to 2010. But ever since then, it comes at it pretty much came at a standstill. So if you look at the growth of the GDP per capita for countries like Japan, Korea, and Taiwan right now, it's very low. It's very low. As I mentioned just a moment ago, GDP per capita for countries right now, such as Japan and South Korea. South Korea actually bypassed Japan as of this year. So if you look here, South Korea's GDP per capita is $34,165. If you look there below, Japan is $33,138. So if you take into consideration that Japan was an ultra wealthy country at one point and has stagnated the last 20 years, I mean, I think that $30,000 number is pretty much the same place Japan was about 20 years ago. So that's how low the growth level has been in Japan. I mean, if you guys talk about what the federal deficit is in the United States right now, Japan's federal deficit is actually worse. So if we looked at the federal deficit in the United States as a proportion of the GDP, last year, 2023, 1.7 trillion, 6.3%. If you look at what that number looks like compared relative to the entire government's GDP right now, if you look here right now, it is 130% of the GDP as of 2021. And as of let's see here, as of 2024, the percent of our federal deficit relative to the federal GDP or the entire United States GDP is 124%. If you're curious what the numbers look like for Japan, Japan's federal deficit is almost twice that. So if you look at what the numbers look like for Japan's debt to federal debt ratio, this article shows that it is 226% in Japan right now. So if we look at Japan's debt burden right now, Japan's debt to GDP ratio is 226%. So again, the growth in Japan has stagnated the last 20 years, and that's what happens when your federal deficit is so high. So again, here in the United States as well, we have experienced decent growth in the last couple of years. It's definitely higher than Japan's, but if we keep on printing out the money at the rate that we're doing right now, and if we don't do enough manufacturing or just have enough jobs here as far as the service industry is concerned and make things more efficient, we're going to have the exact same situation that Japan has. You know, our GDP per the debt ratio for in relation to our GDP is going to continue going up. As I mentioned, it's at 124% right now. Japan 226%. So if you thought American or federal deficit in the United States was bad, there are other countries out there that have a worse federal GDP federal deficit rate. That's called hyperinflation if we continue printing money, I believe. Well, we're not quite there yet, Goyo, because again, we're not spending the money like some of these other countries like Argentina and South Africa and Zimbabwe and those countries have gone through when they were experiencing hyperinflation. So this, as bad as it was under Biden right now, it's still nowhere near the definition of hyperinflation. Hyperinflation, if I recall correctly, is what, 100%? Let's look at what the definition of hyperinflation is. I don't know if there is a textbook definition, but if I recall correctly, it says the definition is a monthly inflation rate that exceeds 50%. So that would be, if it exceeds 50%, that's the equivalent yearly rate of 100 or 12,800%. So I don't know. That's a little extreme, Goyo. So again, America, what's happening in the United States definitely does not qualify as hyperinflation. Apparently, the textbook definition is 50% per month, and we're nowhere near that. Very few countries have experienced hyperinflation on that level. So. No, if you see here, Argentina at one point, Austria, Brazil, China, France, Germany during the Weimar Republic, Greece during the German Italian occupation, Hungary, Malaya during the Japanese occupation, North Korea, Peru, Poland. I mean, these are examples of countries that have experienced it, but it was very brief when these events happened. So if you look at what years that these things have occurred, for most part, the only thing that has ever occurred recently in recent time is Zimbabwe. If you see all the other countries listed here, you have Yugoslavia in 1994, but before that, and Armenia in 1993, and what is that, Turkmenistan in 1993. Prior to that, it's been some time before countries have experienced hyperinflation. So, Goyo, it's not again what's happening right now in America. Definitely nowhere near the definition of hyperinflation. I don't think the U.S. can ever get to a point of hyperinflation because, again, 50% per month. If the U.S. had that issue, again, every other country would be impacted by it. So I don't think we would ever get to that point, no matter how reckless our government is. So that's my 2 cents on that. I remember Japan products in the 70s were like Chinese products now. Um, yes and no. They were flooding the American market. Some of it was low quality, some of it was very high quality. That's the same thing with Chinese products. There's Chinese products that are very low quality. There are Chinese products that are very high quality. So I don't like making blanket statements about any of these countries with their quality of products. Even in the United States, we make some products that are really shitty quality, and we make some stuff that are really high quality. As far as quality is concerned, it's a very individual company or individual mantra. So I don't think it really depends on which country. I mean, if you want to say overall nationally as an average, yes, Japanese products overall will be better quality than Chinese products. But as far as quantifying that, it just kind of comes down to what you pay for. So they ain't lazy, that's for sure, William Hupp. They ain't lazy. Call it the cons. Genghis Khan is responsible for 1% of the world population of the world. I think, yeah, Blake. There were some numbers about that as far as how much of his genes are in Eastern Asia right now, or just in Eastern and Central Asia, and it is absolutely possible that it is upwards to 1% of that region, not the entire world. Probably because of war. It's just 24 hours hyperinflation. That's interesting. It's so fast. Yeah, go. The U.S. can never be in a situation where that happens. If There's just no way. I mean, the U.S. would have to print trillions of dollars overnight for something like that to happen, and that can't physically happen. Much less, I mean, even if the Federal Reserve Bank was to allocate tens of trillions of dollars right now, that would not cause hyperinflation. That would still not cause the classic definition of hyperinflation. It would be substantially higher than that. Literally, they would have to say like, okay, $100 trillion overnight. Then maybe we might have the classic definition of hyperinflation for 1 month. But again, if $100 trillion was to hit the economy, and that gets run through the economy, it could end up growing, rebounding pretty quickly too. At some point, it will just basically nominalize. So even if you have $100 trillion of additional money being printed out within a year or two, it could just end up normalizing the situation, because countries like the United States, we have a lot of buffer compared to a lot of these smaller countries. Again, just by the fact of the fact of the matter is, when it comes to world trade, if you want to see what the dollar standard looks like, as far as how much the US dollar is used for world trade right now. Let me see if there is a good article about that. I do want to touch upon that real quick here, so you guys have an idea of what is a percentage of world trade. So if you look at as of 2022, guys, if you're curious as to how dominant the US dollar still is when it comes to other currencies, you can see that when it comes to foreign exchange transaction, is still 88%, share of export invoicing is still 54%, and share of foreign exchange reserves is 59%. And if you compare that with the euro, euro is at 20 to 30%, and again, most of this 30% value is within the eurozone. It's not so much of the countries outside of those regions. And then as far as the pound sterling, pretty trivial. The Japanese yen, also pretty trivial, and the renminbi, even more trivial. So again, guys, when it comes to the dollar standard, Even 2024, there's no other currency that comes even remotely close to how powerful the US dollar is on the world market. I found a business referral for you. He's a cool vet. For what kind of, which one, Ben? For the batteries or for the robots? Definitely let me know. Drop me a line. By many measures, China is a remarkable civilization. I mean, if you take into consideration, David, China was for what the past 4 or 5 thousand years, it was the biggest civilization in the world. You know, up until what the Ming Dynasty, they were still the leaders in pretty much everything when it came down to technology, when it came down to trade, when it came down to manufacturing, production, and innovation. Um, it's really shocking, surprising that the last 200 years China was as stagnant as it was. But prior to the Qing Dynasty, China was the de facto most powerful country in the world. So when you have the leadership in China right now want China to return to its glories, I mean there's no reason why China can't become number one in the world because again they have 1.4 billion people, they have tremendous amount of natural resources, they have a diaspora that's in every corner of the world. So in terms of influence that China can have theoretically, I mean I was at you guys saw me that I was in North Carolina yesterday. You know, I was sitting there trying to pass time on Thursday afternoon. So I went to the Museum of History in North Carolina in Raleigh, literally right across the street from the state capital of North Carolina, and just looking at through the exhibits that they had there. And even, you know, in North Carolina in the 1700s, they were bringing in Chinaware from China in the 1700s. I mean, that's how dominant the Chinese were when it came down to your cookware and your dinner tableware. Even in that in the exhibits I was watching there, they were talking about how dominant tea was in terms of high cultural life in North Carolina of all places in the 1700s. So if you take into consideration how powerful China was as a civilization, David, again, it was one of the most powerful civilizations for the past couple thousand years. It was just literally within the past 2 centuries where China kind of lost its footing. That's why when it comes down to how the Chinese view the British, for example, with Hong Kong and the opium wars and whatnot, they have a lot of resentment for Western countries because of that. So yes, yen is going away. They are going towards Bitcoin. What do you mean there? The Japanese yen is the Japanese are going towards Bitcoin. Um, I don't know what the daily transaction rates look like for Bitcoin right now. Obviously, it is growing. Um, I don't know what percentage of all the Bitcoin has been mined today. There's not that much left, if I recall correctly. And there's going to be a point as to what happens after all the Bitcoin out there is mined, whether it continues improving in value or because of the fact that it's limited, it will be limited. The value will continue going up. BRICS Nation, what about BRICS Nation? More fun in the country. As far as I mentioned, BRICS nations have nothing in common with each other. They don't even trust each other. So even though they're pushing for an asset-backed currency, I don't even know how they're going to do that when Russia doesn't trust China and China doesn't trust India, and Brazil and South Africa as individual countries don't have that much power on the world stage. So I don't have much confidence in faith that BRICS nation are going to have much of an impact when it comes to world currency. That's my opinion. Again, could they do it? Could they pull it off? If it takes enough time and they continue trading with amongst themselves in that whatever currency that they produce, possibly. But as I mentioned, 2024 right now, if you look at how much the renminbi in terms of the share of global foreign exchange is 2%, share of the world trade right now is 4%, compared to the US dollar at 59 and 54%. They got a long way to go. Yeah, a long way to go. All currency will be gone one day. It'll all be digital. A lot of people say that. Um, the scary thing about that, even the Chinese have experienced, because I mean, if you guys haven't been to China, um, since I've been going there, they used to just carry around stacks of cash, and then they kind of completely bypassed the credit card phase. They went straight from carrying around wads of cash to completely using their phone, using WePay and Alipay to pay for everything. So when it came down to how quickly they made that transition from carrying physical currency to carrying only digital currency, they did that quicker than any other country in the world. Again, if you see what the rate, I mean, basically nobody brings around cash in China anymore. You can go anywhere in the country, and they will take digital currency in China right now. You can pay using your phone, um, using WeChat Pay or Alipay. Even in the U.S. right now, vast majority of our transactions are still done by credit cards. But having said that, I think the reason why I say that, because I wanted to address what you mentioned, all currency will be gone one day. When there's even a remote network outage or a power outage, you can't trade at all. So you want to go to the nearest convenience store and the network's out. You can't pay for, a can of Coke. You can't pay for a bottle of, some drink or some snack. That's the biggest problem with digital currency. What happens if the networks go down? What happens if, like, a lot of you guys who follow me, we talk about off-grid life and resiliency and developing that. If, a lot of you guys are concerned about EMPs, what the hell would happen if there was an EMP blast that knocked out all the major networks around the world? Digital currency would be absolutely, absolutely worthless. Cryptocurrency would be worthless. So that's why I say, if you guys want to invest in crypto, that's fine. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Do it just to spread your odds. But if you're really worried about the U.S. dollar failing, then yeah, go ahead and do that. But as I mentioned, if the U.S. dollar fails, if we have a nuclear attack and there was an EMP blast and it destroys all the networks out there, cryptocurrency is worthless too. So that's just my 2 cents on that. So after all, it is mine. It is good. Um, there has been a voter-approved bill that prevents state from raising taxes without voter approval. Um, that prevents state from raising taxes without voter approval. So are you saying that's what passed in California, William? I'm not sure what you mean there, but at the end of the day, um, you still have to raise it if you have too much of a deficit. So I'm sure there's got to be some kind of checks and balance in place there. Is China better than the U.S. portrays? Is China better than the USA portrays? That's a tough question, Robert, because there's a lot of things that China is better, and there's a lot of things that China is worse at. It's the same way. If I reverse the question, as far as how the U.S. is relative to China for the Chinese people from their point of view, it's the same thing too. It's just different. So for China, for all its glamour and glitz in the major cities, if you see the rate of construction and how modern everything looks, from the outside it does look amazing. And again, I've been going to China for years, for decades now, watching the progress when it comes to the development of China. And again, there's no other country in the world that has developed that rapidly. I say that as being a South Korean, seeing the rise of Seoul. South Korea comes very, very close in terms of development rate, but when it comes to the development of tier one cities in China, it has been even quicker. But having said that, now. Those are just the tier one cities. If you go to tier four cities in the poorer parts of rural China, it's poorer than any the poorest portions of the North America. So that's why I say take that with a grain of salt. Some of the wealthy parts of China is very, very well developed, and the HDI, Human Development Index, is very comparable to the United States. But there are plenty of parts across China where the HDI level is worse than the worst redneck backwards place in North America. So again, um, it's a spectrum, Robert. There's parts of China that are far ahead. There's parts of China that are far behind. And so that's why, again, if you look at overall, China has what, population of 1.4 billion. The average, the income level across the country is still only in like the $10,000 range, whereas the United States is substantially higher than that. And so that's why it's not directly comparable. What do you think about China's high speed? Let me go through. Sorry, let me go through some of these questions real quick, guys. What do you think about China's high speed train network? David, we're just talking about the cost of rail in China and different countries out there. Um, a lot of that was government fueled project to try to push construction work, and not all, very few of them are very profitable right now, David. When it comes to my thoughts on the high-speed rail network, it makes sense for a country like China. I mean, with the population density they have and the sheer amount of air traffic that they would have to replace to move all that people, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea for them to invest in their high-speed train network. But one, it is costly for the average person out there, and two, at the end of the day, high-speed rail cannot replace trains when it comes, or high-speed rail cannot replace airlines when it comes to capacity. So it's certainly not bad. And again, the cost of rail in China is, as a foreigner like me, it's very reasonable. It's pretty cheap if I think about it. But for the locals there, especially if you live in one of the smaller tier cities, it's not exactly affordable. So they do still have cheaper, slower trains and buses that take the average Joe across the country. So I like God's money, always will. I mean, more fun in the country, that's always a great option. Again, as I mentioned, it doesn't hurt to have gold. As I mentioned before too, I mean, I'm all for you guys having gold assets, but if shit were to hit the fan, again, how readily other people around you would be able to trade gold, again, is a huge question mark. If you have a neighbor that's willing to accept gold, that's great. But if there's people out there who's like, I don't want your gold for it, then is it worth anything? So again, spreading odds is always a good thing, whether you invest in gold or cryptocurrency or whatnot. It can't hurt to do those things because, again, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. But as I mentioned, if shit were to hit the fan, we would probably become a barter system. Trading, I'll give you 5 pounds of, rice for a pound of sugar or some kind of trade like that, right? Because even when it comes to gold, whether or not you're going to have neighbors who are willing to take that as a form of currency there. That's a good point. Interesting perspective. Ledgers, sir, what state are you located in, Robert? I'm located in Central California. Located in California. I'm down in my office right now, but I really need to get going to my ranch soon. So I'm gonna do this for another 10 minutes, and I'm gonna drive up to my ranch, and then tomorrow we'll have our usual sessions for the day during the daytime, guys. So I'm gonna drive back to my place tonight. That bill is for California. Okay, gotcha. Yes, they're challenging in California Supreme Court and might not get struck down. Well, I mean, I don't know how much that's really going to make a difference because, again, at the end of the day, if they have to raise the taxes because we have a huge government deficit, you got to do what you got to do, right? How can they not raise taxes and have have spending go out of control? So, I mean, I don't know what kind of checks and balances they would require, but that's my 2 cents on that. Let's see here. Wait, if everything is shut down, you wouldn't be able to use a card either. Yeah, no, exactly. So that's why, when it comes to payment and currency, I think at the end of the day, it's still good to have paper currency and coins. I don't think it's a bad idea to not at least have some paper money and coins as a reserve. I think people should carry some cash around, and people should carry some coins around. And again, when it comes down to how it impacts small businesses, guys, there's a lot of restaurants out there, small mom and pop shops that are out there. Just think about the fact that they have to pay 3% in all their transactions to the credit card companies. That stuff adds up really quick. So I mean, if they do $1 million in sales, that's $30,000 that they have to pay in credit card fees a year. So if you don't have to, it certainly doesn't hurt to pay people using cash and coins for these small businesses if you want to do your part in helping them. So I mean, that's that's just a small aside there. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your points. No problem there, Robert. Ammunition is a good trade. Oh, absolutely. You know, um, yeah. Having a couple thousand rounds of, it's funny because whenever there's people in the media after a mass shooting and they're like, oh, this person had a couple thousand rounds of ammunition. I'm like, shit, I have a couple thousand rounds of ammunition. You know, I think anyone that has guns, and they go target practicing, I mean, having a couple thousand rounds of ammunition is not considered that out there, right? Most of my friends that own guns, they all easily have thousands of rounds of ammunition. Actually, I have the fewest rounds out of any of my close friends, So, yes, ammunition is definitely a good trade, more fun in the country. I absolutely agree with you on that. Especially if you do live in the countryside. If you see my place, I'm in the middle of nowhere in Central California, 640 acres to myself, and no neighbors. And if I had to, if shit were to hit the fan, and I have to rely on hunting wild animals, I got to do what I got to do, right? So. I absolutely agree with you there. Thank you, sir. Good night, all. All right, have a great night, Robert. Well, if things go bad, I'll be knocking on your door. I was just kidding. I'll bring my alien friends with me. All right, I would love to meet your alien friends. More fun in the country, thumbs up. As long as humans exist, there will be scammers. Absolutely, especially 22 caliber. Yeah, 22 22 LR. I probably have several thousand rounds. I have 1,000 of what 223s. And probably a few hundred and 308s just because of how damn expensive those rounds are. But yeah, 22 LRs, you just go around plinking. You can go through 100 rounds easily. So, which by the way, I know a lot of you guys have been curious about my video clips talking about batteries and whatnot. So one of these days, I will get around to shooting these batteries with those 22 LR rounds and 223 rounds, because I'm sure you guys are curious what would happen if you were to shoot lithium and sodium ion batteries. So I do plan on doing that. So again, keep watching, guys. I don't think I can do that during a live stream because I'm sure TikTok will shut down my live stream for shooting a gun, in the middle of a live stream. But I will definitely do some short video clips of me shooting some of these batteries, so you can see that not all lithium batteries are alike. That's a huge misnomer that people have. Lithium batteries, there's so many different chemistries out there, and they're, as far as danger level, as far as like short circuiting, as far as penetration tests, a lot of different factors that are involved. So again, I do plan on shooting some of these batteries so you guys can see how different they are, how the different chemistries react in the ways they do. So I will do that at some point in the near future here. Come summertime when I have more time in the daytime, I will definitely do that, guys. So guys, I'm going to pack up. I'm going to drive up to my home now. And again, if I have some time late night tonight, maybe I'll do a quick late night session tonight. I know our late night sessions get really interesting, and I know you guys really enjoy doing that. So I will try to do that if I don't get home at too late of an hour. And again, our late night sessions, we open it up to any kind of topics that you guys want to talk about. I'm leaving on Wednesday. Where are you going, Samantha? Where are you headed to? Westbound. Are you coming down to California? So again, guys, I will try to. Oh, California, you're coming out. Good, good, good. I know you've been missing California, so good to see you come out here. But again, I'm gonna drive up, guys. Pack up, drive up, and if I have some time tonight, I'll do my late night session. If not, I'll definitely be live streaming all day tomorrow. And again, I don't have to have my son with me because my wife is taking care of him, so that gives me a little more time to really focus on doing my live streams, because there's some stuff that I wanted to cover regarding the batteries and whatnot up at my ranch. So we'll talk about all that and more, guys. Until then, have a good night, guys.